Well, welcome to the critique of assignment 3, and this is Introduction to Graphic Design. And you were to reinterpret a menu, an existing menu of some sort. A menu can be a table of contents, it can be an actual restaurant menu, it can be basically an outline or anything that is hierarchical. And basically redesign it with hierarchy in mind. And not using templates, but making it your own. So let's start with this one. This appears to be the contents for a cookbook. And the first thing we see, of course, is the word contents. First of all, because of its hierarchical positioning or its vertical positioning within the page. And it's the largest thing on the page. So via scale, hierarchy, and position hierarchy, it is the first thing we see. And then we have some decorative borders, and then we start with the front matter, and then we get into it. This all reads at the same level, and although we do have uppercase and bold, because everything is run together, it's a little bit difficult to read. We do get sections, page numbering, but it is kind of difficult to differentiate the various recipes that we're looking for. So if we were to actually use this as a cook, a home chef, how quickly can we find what we're looking for? So that would be the question, because everything is run on a little bit like this. And if you were trying to put all the contents of a very long, involved, complex cookbook onto one page, this is certainly one way you can do it. The thing is it the most practical of all the options out there? We also get, this almost reads as a page number rather than part of the table of contents because of its positioning. So just some things to think about. The page is very nicely laid out. There are a couple of structural concerns. And if we think about how we're laying things out on a grid, there has to be a fairly practical and consistent positioning. And obviously, if we look at the alignment, the implied line there, we're doing really well. Index could probably bump up right against it, but we do have a strong flow there. And then pulling it out from this side, it is also aligned. I would actually pull the C out so that it landed on against this line, so that there was a tangency to that implied line. And that will tighten up the page quite a bit. Same thing over here, the S could pop out. The contents could be larger perhaps, and maybe not quite so spaced out to accommodate for the increase in point size for the type. So that S comes out here, or so that S actually is bumping up here, and then the C bumps over here, and then you have the order and the proportional spacing between the letters, the kerning. So that lines up fairly well. Get rid of the snap, and then we're okay, there we go. That lines up fairly well. So with the left alignment and the right alignment, this is what we call justified. And when you justify text, you have to watch out for gutters and gaps within the text, because very often you can have really wide gutters, like right here. The eye is going to catch on these and come straight down. So this is kind of a minor issue because this is not really blatant, but it's there. You see this a lot in printed newspapers and sometimes in ebooks, where there's just this big old gutter running through the text, and it's kind of distracting, first of all, slows down the reading of the text, and just doesn't look good. So remember that with anything visual, when we're dealing with the form language, the functionality of that is that it has to work within the context. So we don't want to, in a book, slow down anybody's ability to read and get the information that they want. I think the choice of these elements, they're just height-wise, they're competing a little bit with the height of the letters. And so that could be a different idea maybe, or smaller. The word contents is the only thing that doesn't utilize the double column. So overall, your hierarchy is working. There is room to create a stronger sense of hierarchy with the word contents and really have that as the anchor point for the entire page. And again, the usability, the reader friendliness of the way this is laid out might be in question. So here we have a pierogi place. The first thing we see is the shield here. And then if you squint, we see the horizontal bars and we see the white horizontal bars. So coming into the page, the first thing we do see is the pierogi patrol because it's at the top and it's definitely aligning with the edge of the design up here, which is fine. This is centered pretty much under this, maybe moving it just a little more to the right, because if we drop a line straight down, it looks like there's more space between the S and that implied line than there is over here between the P and that line. So the centering of things could be served better. So the centering of things could be better served. So if we're putting this on a grid, I think the main issues with this are not the hierarchy in terms of size and positioning, but in terms of color and also how you're using the grid, because you're obviously setting this up on a grid. So let's just say that this is our center point. So let's just say that this is our column. And on the other side, we'll do this. By the way, this white box serves absolutely no purpose. So it does not need to be there. And the reason you'd get rid of it is because it's not necessary. There is absolutely no reason to have that box there, unless it's part of the logo, but that doesn't really make sense. So that's already a lot cleaner. So now we have this, basically this breakdown horizontally. So we have this section, this section, this section, and this section. If this is the center line, this goes to about not quite 7 inches. So yeah, so that's about right. So that's the center. So the logo is not centered within the horizontal space. It's too far to the right because we see more distance here than we do here. So the logo needs to move to the left a bit. We want to look for consistency. Is there a alignment between the ends of those bars right there? And is there an alignment there? No. This moves toward the left. This moves toward the right. And notice this and this. So there's a lot more width here and less width here. One of the things, if there is no order that these things need to appear in, because it doesn't look like it's not alphabetical, so it doesn't really matter. It's kind of a random order. These are all over shorter. These are all over longer. You could certainly stagger these. You could have a shorter one and then a longer one underneath it and maybe another shorter one, and then over here you'd have the longer, shorter, longer. And that way you could make good use of the space. But the main issue that's going on here is that there's all of this room over here and very little over here. So what is with all of this when all of this is over here? The centering of this is right here. The centering of this is right here. So the big question is then, how are these things aligned? You've got 3 columns down here, which is fine. So you can go from 2 columns to 3 columns very easily because you have a break. So the better idea then within that section would be to understand and acknowledge this. Move this over so it's centered here, and move this over so it's centered here. So this could probably stay there, but if we move this over, and I'm going from this edge to the center line and trying to center this between the two, and right now I'm just eyeballing it, I'm not actually measuring it, but it just has a better sense to it right now. And again, because these are all longer and these are shorter, you could alternate the long with the short and even out the width of both columns so that they're fairly equal. So these columns should be all lined up, and this should be centered, and this should be centered. Again, hierarchy is working fairly well, but use of a grid is actually not working as well as it should. And when things are off, by the way, there's a very subtle psychological thing that goes on. There's a sense of lack of organization because we prefer order to chaos. And we're always looking for alignments and patterns and things that make sense and things that are actually logical. So we have to design that way because that's the way human beings are. So this is kind of cool because it's all cut paper. By virtue of different typeface and positioning in the vertical space and scale, the headline is the first thing we read, and then we come directly into this framed circle area. This is the most complex of everything else that's going on. It has the most color change. It has a great deal of value contrast. So in vertical positioning, it is also noticeable. So we come in here and here. And actually, we're going to jump over here because this is a focal point because it's isolated and it's high contrast against the light background. So the eye's coming in here. We're going to jump here. Then we'll probably come to this. But then these two will also attract our attention. So the hierarchy here is working pretty well. Just in terms of design, this seems to be a different typeface than this. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different typefaces at least. And this has a very different personality from this. So using two script typefaces together, probably not the best idea. Using two different, I guess that is a sans serif. Using a serif with a sans serif is fine, but these don't belong with this. You know, when you get too much variety in typography, it starts getting confusing. So we don't want to confuse the elegance. The other thing I'm looking at is the triangulation between the three circles. So it's sort of a 30, 60, 90 triangle. But it would seem that maybe just dropping this circle down a little more might be a good idea. And not too much, just a little bit. But there is these two relate to each other, and then this one is the odd man out, and then we have this and this kind of relating to each other. If we're looking at the directionality, the implied line from center to center here, to really organize this and really tighten it up, that same angle should exist between the two smaller circles. So that would mean that this circle should also drop a little more. Because if we look at where this is and where this is, this positioning is a little bit awkward. It either needs to drop and get a little closer to the characters, or it needs to sit up more in the middle. But if we have this angle, then it makes sense, it's logical that this angle would parallel that, which would pinpoint this kind of right here. So again, layout and design has a logic to it, and it's very important to understand that. There is a lot of activity going on in the left-hand side of this space and very little on the right. Running the rule between sauces and rubs makes sauces and rubs difficult to read. I know you've set up this convention, but since the rule is white and the type here is white, it really impedes the readability. So we come in here, so that's our hierarchy. That gives us our orientation down the page. And we have this over here. We have this, and we have this, and we have this. And then we have all of this. The question is, could this have been rearranged, redesigned, so that we don't have so much space here that doesn't do anything? The purpose of white space is to support the positive elements in the design, the information in the design. So the white space is as important as the type and the color, and well, the negative space is as important because it doesn't have to be white. But the negative space is as important as everything else in the design. It is part of the design. And right now we have things arranged so that there's a lot of negative space, but the negative space is actually being framed by the positive elements. So we are actually focusing our eyeballs here rather than focusing here, because we're framing the negative with the positive elements. It's kind of like if we've got, 4 things, 5 things in a group, this is where the eye's going to go, because that's the way we see things. The main issue with this is not the hierarchy. The hierarchy is working really well. The main issue with this is just the overall layout, the composition, and how it's structured. So again, what is the logic behind having the rectangle, the zones doing what they're doing, and so much space? So your section headers are working really well here. This can be called out differently than it is. Just having it smaller is enough, but following the idea of the black type rather than the white would be a really good idea. It would be a good change to make. And it looks like we've interspersed the Latin with the actual menu items. So that's kind of interesting. But so again, your hierarchy is working, but your composition and structure are working against the strength of the hierarchy. So when you start your design, consider the whole space. So you've got all of this to work with. How are you going to divide that up in a meaningful way, in a way that is structured and is going to make sense and support your composition? Then we have specialty pizza. And the hierarchy, actually the pizza is the main thing. That's where we land. It's the largest thing. It's the color. It's full color. That makes sense because that's kind of the point. And then the second read are the pizza styles, the flavor profiles, these headers. And then the third read are the sizes. And then the fourth is the ingredients. This kind of comes out on its own. And again, we have a clear hierarchy within this box, with this being the first read. We see the second and these third. And actually, this is not the first thing we see. It's probably about third or fourth level, because the focus is all within this zone. And so the eye is going to come in here, and we're going to do this, and then we're going to probably wrap around, or we're going to do this all the way down. So that means that this will be very secondary, but the focus is on the pizza itself, so that's okay. The name of the establishment doesn't have to be the first read, depending upon the purpose of what you're trying to do. So if the purpose is to sell the pizza, making the pizza the hero like this is a good idea. So looking at structure, it's basically dividing everything in half, and that it is subdividing vertically here and here. And then we have this and this. So that's basically the structure that we're working with. So it's following that pretty well. Things are easy to read. They make sense. So if you want to go order pizza, it's done its job.